Welcome to the Girl Talk Divorce Edition. Today I'm joined by Max Emmer, family law attorney of Emmer Law, specializing in collaborative divorce, mediated and amicable family law matters, and Brian Mutter, certified divorce lending professional of Forward Mortgage. I'm Danielle Workman, private wealth advisor with the Financial Center for Women, empowering women to take control of their financial independence. Today our topic is gray divorce. So let's start with a couple that is kind of typical of a gray divorce situation. Linda is 63. She's a mom of two with three grandchildren. Her husband of 34 years, Bill, is 66, and he retired last year. And since then, they've been fighting all the time. Linda works part-time and does not have access to benefits. They've lived in their home for over 30 years, and their mortgage is paid off. The market value is over $400,000. Bill has a pension that he's already started to receive at $2,200 a month over both their lives. Bill's also receiving his Social Security of about $3,000 a month. He has an IRA with $400,000 in it. And Linda raised the kids and she worked part-time, so her Social Security benefit would only be $1,200 a month at full retirement age. She'd really like to keep the house because it's close to the grandkids, but she'd need to buy out Bill. Bill would like to move to Florida to spend more time on the golf course, and he'd like to buy a condo in a golf community. So he's going to need some down payment for that purchase. So Max, I'm going to start with you. Can you share with us some of the issues in a gray divorce, given this age and the property division, and how would accounts and spousal support go?
Thanks, Danielle. And I think, as people who are in the know have seen, gray divorce is, I'm going to say, even bigger than a buzzword now, whether it's the front page of the Wall Street Journal, New York Times magazines. It's really this movement of people in their 50s and 60s and onward who, due to technology changes, life expectancy changes, they're getting divorced later because they have a lot of life yet to live. And it is presenting situations. And with this couple in particular, two things really stick out. One, most people would think 30-year marriage, et cetera, spousal support is going to be a big play here. But the problem is the idea of permanent spousal support has really gone out of the trend of late, especially for someone who's no longer working. So unfortunately for Linda, the ability for her to collect spousal support because the ability of her husband to pay it is a challenge here. Now, the other issue would be, of course, Linda needs and deserves to be taken care of due to raising the children over all of those years and this being a historic marriage. The two biggest assets here are the husband's retirement and the equity in the home. And a common mistake people make is they often always treat retirement dollars versus equity dollars as the same dollar value. Here, in working with a team like us, we have a real estate professional, a lending professional, a financial professional, a divorce lawyer. We would work to come up with creative solutions because Linda wants the house, hubby wants to move to Florida and golf. And what we need to try and do here is look holistically to say, what in the marital estate can help them accomplish both of their goals or get them close to it? Obviously, Linda wants to keep the house. That's fine. There doesn't need to be a mortgage per se, but she has to buy out his equity in the home and he needs cash to go buy a property. So the other biggest asset here would be those retirement and Social Security. So what Danielle and I would do in concert with Brian is we'd really make what I call a marital balance sheet and say, what are the assets of this marriage and what are our options for kind of moving around those buckets of assets to make them both equally set up, but also towards their goals. So in a situation like this, the challenge would be for Linda is how to ensure she's supported on a going forward basis with a retired husband. And while that might make traditional spousal support either less an amount of duration, we have to make sure Linda's taken care of, but at the same time, her husband gets his rightful equity out of the house too.
So Max, I think we could all agree that two households cost more with
Mhm.
divided income than one. And so I see
100%.
what you're saying here is that it's not so easy to just talk about division of property and assets when you have to consider also the impact of income and its sources.
And in a situation like this where there's really no more income aside from, it's very different to, I always tell people, most people are living in a house they probably can't afford or barely afford as two people. Now we're going to two households on arguably the same amount of money, which, as you both know, creates myriad challenges. And so, while we want to provide information and creative solutions and options, there's only so many ways to skin a cat, I say. And we will do our level best to find options, but I also say, we can't squeeze, blood from a rock. And it's about taking what's there and what the realities are for both parties and coming up with the best options for themselves and their families.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but it does look like someone's going to need to make a purchase or a buyout or a new mortgage. So let's dive into that with Brian. Linda to either retain the home, either do some kind of buyout or trade off for Bill. But then
Mm-hmm.
Bill is going to need some money if he's going to want to buy a place of his own. What are some things that you've seen in this scenario? And
You
then
know,
also talk a little bit about while we're on that subject. I know that there's some qualifications about what counts as income. Can you jump into those kind of conversation here for us?
yes, great question, Danielle. So this is a very unique scenario. It presents a couple different challenges, right? Like Max said, it's the question of spousal support, in this case from Bill to Linda, is questionable, right? Due to the fact that he's got limited income himself. And of course, that affects Linda's prospects because obviously the more qualifying income we can show for Linda, well, the more mortgage she can qualify for. Okay. In this specific situation, so Linda's working part-time, which can always be a bit of a mixed bag. From an underwriting perspective, there are certain criteria that we have to meet to utilize part-time income. It's one of these things where the the income calculation done by the underwriters may give Linda a qualifying income, that is to say, what the lender considers her income to be for the purposes of the new loan. Her qualifying income may be considered very different from what she feels like she's living. In other words, it's a 2-year average. So my point is, she may be working 35 hours a week now, but if we go back 2 years and she was working far fewer hours, all of that time gets averaged into the income calculation.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
with respect to the spousal supports, again, like Max said, it's questionable that in this case that it would even be granted. That Bill would have to pay Linda any spousal support. But if there were support involved, that would be something we need to plan for from a mortgage perspective, because in addition to this part-time income, we also would have spousal support. Now, underwriting guidelines say that spousal support has to have been received for 6 months before it's considered that qualifying income for the mortgage. So if Linda were to get any type of support income, in order to use it for the purposes of the loan, we would have to plan that you have to plan the loan closing in accordance with when the spousal support starts. We need 6 months there.
Okay.
I just wanted to say one thing, Brian. We can typically do in a case, especially when it's whether it's collaborative or it's fairly amicable, a lot of times we can enter a interim stipulated spousal support and or child support order. So
Beautiful.
we can in effect, quote unquote, start the clock ticking. And in most of my cases, I do try to do that. And that is one of many benefits to having one, a multidisciplinary team approach because you're getting this information and this nuanced counsel and advice. But second, you are taking a very protracted process and you're able to streamline it and make it more efficient.
And I'm glad you interjected that, Max, because that was the next point that I was going to say was, the guidelines say we have to wait 6 months. There are by knowing the kind of inside track and how some of these more nuanced mortgage guidelines work, like you said, we can request the attorney get what we call temporary orders to, like you said, start that child support so that our 6 month countdown starts before the date that the divorce is finalized.
Exactly.
Matt, with respect to Bill and Linda's situation, Danielle, Max brought up another very good point, and it's this expression I use too, which is there are more than one way to skin a cat. So, the underlying challenge in Linda and Bill is that if Linda wants to keep the home, then Bill is due half of the value of the home, half of that equity, because the home is free and clear. So most people think, okay, well, if the home is free and clear, I'll take out a mortgage. Let's pretend the home value is 400. Okay, Linda will borrow 200K, and then that cash out from the mortgage goes to Bill. Well, the challenge is, like we've been talking about, Linda now has to qualify for that mortgage
And pay that mortgage.
and pay the mortgage. And from from going for a woman on a fixed income, going from a house that's paid off to now having a mortgage payment every month, that's a big payment and lifestyle shock. So we want to avoid that whenever possible. I always recommend, in a case where we have to effectuate an equity buyout, I always lean on, in this case, it would be you, Danielle, the financial professional, to help us say, okay, in the example that Linda owes Bill $200,000, which is half of the home's value, are there any other assets or investments that we can take to satisfy, we can give Bill 200K, doesn't have to come from the mortgage. And the reason it's so helpful to have a financial planner like you on the team, Danielle, is you can look at those different assets and you have a better understanding than I do of
And me.
which asset performs better, what's going to have a better tax implication, which one do we want to leave alone for these kind of reasons. So I always say there are different levers that we can pull, but these are all these in this one single situation. All these examples are why it's so important to work with a team that understands sort of how to work through the issues that are brought up by divorce.
Yeah, thank you for that added insight. And it is really a team effort. As Max and I would work together to really understand what a fair property settlement might look like and whether an equity buyout of the house is offset with some of those retirement assets. You hit the nail right on the head that they have different tax consequences and can't really be treated equally. And, one of the tools in a divorce is a quadro, a qualified domestic relations order. And this would also be used to consider Linda's claims to Bill's pension and his IRA. Because Bill's already elected to take his pension, it is considered a marital asset. And while Linda is working part-time and she's only 63, she's not reached that full retirement age to collect her full Social Security benefits. She'll also be entitled to spousal benefits even once they're divorced because her marriage was over 10 years long. But the age in which she files and the extent of her part-time income are going to be really important calculations to really figure out what the best strategy for her Social Security is going to be.
100%.
And how the quadro gets valued is also going to, we already stated, we're taking a household that has all these sources of income and now we're dividing them into two households. It could really leave both of them with a far shorter income than is needed to support mortgages on two separate properties. So this is definitely where all of us have to work with a client to have all of these considerations on the forefront and create, sample budgets to make sure that after the divorce is finalized, even if we have these awards of property and retirement assets, that it really gives each party enough money to continue to meet their monthly expenses and live a, reasonable lifestyle that they've come to enjoy.
Yeah, and
So I just wanted to thank.
Oh yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say one thing, that Linda and Bill, a case like this, they would really benefit from a team approach, as like Danielle just laid out very well, because this isn't a cut and dry case. Throwing this into a traditionally litigated case is going to leave them both really unhappily off. And while I always say, you know, we always say a good compromise or mediation is when both parties are equally unsatisfied. Having the framework and the paradigm to see the universe of options here would be the best fit for these two. Because if they just had two lawyers who throw them into court for 9 months, they're both going to leave spending a lot of money and not getting really anything they want. So I think this is a really good example of people who would benefit from working with professionals like each of us.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you for that summary. And we appreciate you listening in. And if you have any questions about the impact of gray divorce and where real estate is involved, I encourage you to reach out, talk to Max, talk to Brian, and we all would work together to make sure that the post-divorce situation means that everybody gets to live indoors and eat food.
Thanks, Danielle.
All
Danielle,
right.
thank you so much.